Welcome to DIY Easy Crafts and BergKnifeMaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to finish your knife making project. For this particular video, we're going to start with an Aeb-l stainless steel blade, which I've already electro etched with a duck hunting theme. We're going to mount beautiful hybrid honeycomb handles, as well as adding the micro bevel and sharpening. So this particular blade, like I mentioned a minute ago, I electro etched. I'm not going to cover the whole electro etching process on this video. I've done a number of videos on the process. I'll put links in the description if you're interested. This process is done with a automotive car battery charger, an electro plate that I wrap gauze around, and electrolyte solution. And you can end up with some really nice designs. The designs are cut out of self-adhesive vinyl with a craft vinyl cutting machine. But anyway, that's what we started with, a blade that was ready to have the handles mounted. Now there's a variety of different ways of mounting handles and profiling and shaping them. I'm not saying this is the best or the fastest or the easiest. This is just the way that I do it. So I start by using a little bit of painter's tape and taping the blade onto both handle scales. So you're taping all three pieces together. I'm going to use the blade kind of as a drill guide. I've got a mounting board or a backing board underneath it. I've got a stop, a clamp, so that if it ever was to jam in that drill, it couldn't spin as long as I'm holding it down. And when I'm drilling through the scale material, I'm actually drilling through all three pieces, the blade and both scales. So as long as the scale material is flat, you shouldn't have any issues at all. Now once the holes are drilled, I mount both pins, or I just push both pins in. I can mark where the blade is going to be, where the handles are going to be, and you get a good idea of what the finished blade is going to look like at that time. Use a good quality epoxy. I'm using an epoxy from West Systems. When I first started knife making, I used a cheaper epoxy. I think it was a DevCon, and you don't end up with the same results. This stuff is pretty strong. When you're mixing the epoxy, make sure you mix it as directed. I mean, you really have to mix this stuff for a minute or two to get the best results. You have to clean off the blade. I usually scrape it up with a very coarse sandpaper after cleaning it with alcohol. I'm going to mount both scales, and then I'll clamp that whole assembly together, and I'll let it dry, usually overnight. Before you let it dry, you have to clean off whatever glue has been squeezed out, or whatever glue you've touched the blade with your fingers that were gunked up. And you can do this with an alcohol wipe. Once that glue is dry, I can go back to the bandsaw and just remove any additional or extra material from the handles. I'm going to do most of the shaping and forming on a 2x72 belt grinder, but you can remove the excess material very easily on a bandsaw. Now I'm using a 90-degree table on the 2x72, and I'm going to use a coarse grit belt, a 36 grit belt, and I'm going to profile the scales until I can just hear that you're in contact with the tang, with the metal or the steel of the blade. And then I will go through a couple of additional grit belts, an 80 grit and then a 120 grit. You can use the 2-inch contact wheel at the bottom of the 2x72. These scales are from Brad Hunt. He makes some beautiful handle material, and he does give you a very thick scale. I'm going to trim these down a little bit. I'm just using a Sharpie so that I can uniformly reduce the thickness on both sides. And I'm going to do that again right on the flat platen of the 2x72, just watching those marks that I just made with the Sharpie. I'm also going to chamfer the forward edge of each side of the handle. Be very careful when you do this. You don't want to touch that blade at all. It is very easy to ruin a knife at this point. Now I do the majority of my shaping right on the 2x72. You have to be a little bit careful. I do the shaping with an 80 grit belt. I slow it down a little bit. I'm probably running at about 50 or 60%. And just slowly start to turn to create that radius. Again, you want to be real careful not to touch the blade with the belt at all. I can use that 2-inch wheel to start to grind out and shape the inside curves of the handle. Just trying to keep both sides uniform, or as uniform as possible. Making sure that everything fits nice in your hand and feels comfortable. You can use a small wheel attachment. Comes in really handy for getting into those hard to reach places. And you can just run through a variety of belts. Again, polishing, you're not really grinding, so you can slow down the belt on the 2x72, to in the 40–50% range. I'm going to do the majority of the sanding with an oscillating sander, and I'm going to run through a variety of different grits. So I'll start with a 220, and then I'll go, I think it was a 400, an 800, and a 1000. And after each disc, I'll also hand sand with that same grit. Once the hand sanding is all done, this handle material from Brad Hunt is very easy to polish. A little bit of buffing compound on a buffing wheel. You're going to buff it without applying a lot of pressure, and it shines up really easily. So the next step, and the final step in the knife making process, is going to be to establish the micro bevel and then sharpen the blade. So I established the micro bevel with a 120 grit belt, and I'm just going to hold it at about 20 degrees on both. I'll do this on both sides until I establish a burr, and I want to establish a burr along the entire length of the blade. Once that burr is established, then I'll go to a higher grit belt. So I did this at 120, 240, 1000, 2000. And then the very final process is to put a leather belt. I just use the 2x72 kind of to mount the belt. I'm not actually turning the belt. And I just stroke with that belt. And you end up with a razor sharp knife. Literally, you can shave with it. And this is the finished product. As I mentioned before, it's an Aeb-l stainless steel, which is really nice steel to work with. It, really good corrosion resistance, and it holds a beautiful edge, a very sharp edge. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. By all means, check us out on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. And if you're interested in knife making, check out the book that Jason Northgard and I put out a couple of years ago called Introduction to Knife Making, and you can find that on Amazon.com. Thank you very much for watching.